Hello Lymanshire, it is Tuesday, Fizzuary 28. So the other day, I made an impulse purchase. I got the complete symphonies of Sibelius for only $20! And when I told this to people, they said, who's Sibelius? And my initial reaction was something along the lines of, are you kidding me? Because he is one of my favorite symphonic composers of all time. He's best known for his 7 symphonies, which were all released in the first quarter of the 20th century, and they just go from this magnificent beauty to this heroicism to this sense of nobility, and his scherzos are completely sardonic, and his adagios are just heart-wrenchingly beautiful. So how can someone this good be so unknown? And frankly, the only answer is he's a victim of history. Because in the beginning of the 20th century, music was going under some massive changes. It was generally considered cool to purposely write music that sounded hideous. Schoenberg had a lovely term for it called the emancipation of the dissonance, but what that really just meant is writing stuff that was ugly on purpose. And because of that change, music became largely politicized. Because communists and Nazis officially condemned this popular, ugly music. So then writing and listening to ugly music became a sign of democracy and freedom, and writing and listening to pretty music became a sign of communism and Nazi sentiments. So a lot of people kind of poo-pooed Sibelius because it sounded good. But at the same time, he was really popular in other areas. For example, he had a profound influence on the classical music culture in England, which of course a lot of people in the classical music world also poo-poo, but it's one of the ones that has survived the longest just because it sounds good. That was one of the things that English composers were known for in the 20th century, is writing stuff that sounded good regardless of the fact that it was cool to write music that sounded ugly. Another reason that he may have been ignored is because it is very hard to fit him into a chapter of 20th century music in a music history course. Because we have, the German family of music, which went from Wagner to Mahler to Schoenberg, and you can see a progression of music as it goes from Romanticism into Expressionism. The same thing goes for French music. You can see Debussy, and you can see the way that Debussy handed it off to Stravinsky. And then out of nowhere, here comes this man from Finland who writes music that sounds like it would have been popular 30 to 50 years earlier. Where do you put that in a chapter on 20th century music? It just doesn't really have a place on that timeline, which I think is the ultimate problem with his legacy. We try to fit history into this line where you can see one thing happen that caused the next thing that caused the next thing, and that's just not always the case. Especially in the arts and music, there are always lots of people working at one time with very different ideas, and lots of people who agree more with one than with the other. But when we try to fit them into this timeline, anomalies happen, and when anomalies happen, we usually don't want to admit it, so we try to either ignore them or find a reason to discount them. And another bigger problem, at least by my supposition, is that the people who were in favor of this purposely ugly sounding music don't want to admit that they were possibly wrong, and don't want to admit that it could have ultimately ended up with the death of Western classical music, at least in terms of the general public actually paying attention to it. And it's a real shame that someone like Sibelius had to get thrown by the wayside in the process. I don't really know how I want to end this video, so I'm just gonna go listen to Sibelius' Second Symphony, okay? And I'll see you guys tomorrow.